And Jesus was coming down that mountain after preaching the Sermon on the Mount and meets this leper and cleanses him. It is an absolutely marvelous event. He shows compassion in this event. He shows the greatness of his power. He shows the divinity or the godhood, that he's the Son of God. And the event also shows the humanity of Jesus. He's a man. I want to look at these verses this morning in a few minutes, but before that, I think it is difficult for us to understand the implication of these 4 verses if we do not firstly understand something of leprosy, or what the Bible here calls leprosy. And I don't mean the modern medical diagnosis, nor do I mean the verbal gymnastics of many modern commentaries on passages like this that jump all around the place. I mean what the Bible actually says about leprosy in Leviticus chapter 13 and 14. Now, they're very long chapters, and it would take a lot of reading to go through them all, but I've read them all many times. But chapter 13 and 14 of the book of Leviticus in the law of God is the Bible's teaching on leprosy, and it makes it very clear that leprosy was a very serious disease. However, other less serious, according to these chapters in the Old Testament, other less serious skin conditions and diseases had similar symptoms. So Leviticus 13 and 14 is God's medical journal for how to diagnose real leprosy from other similar diseases, other infections. And note, please, that in Bible times, for leprosy, there was no cure, no medication, no treatment. Now, the chapters run briefly like this. The man or the woman gets bright spots on their skin. Verse 1 of Leviticus 13. Like the plague of leprosy. What are they to do? Firstly, number 1, come to the priest. Not for any mystical reason, but because the priest can read God's law, Leviticus 13 and 14, what God says, and the priest can read and God's method for diagnosing the difference between leprosy and other infectious diseases. Number 2, examination. Doctors used to work this way. Examination, investigation, diagnosis, treatment. Examination, that's point 2 in Leviticus. The priest would examine the affected area. Was it deeper than skin deep? Are the hairs on that area white? If yes, if it was deeper than the skin and into the flesh and the hair was white, the person is a leper. But if no, then you proceed to part 3, 7-day quarantine, isolation. Then after that, point 4, another examination. If the person's no worse, another 7-day quarantine. That's part 5. Another examination. If they're no worse, they're declared clean and are free to go. This is a sensible treatment of infectious diseases. It stops spread of infection. Now, this is the procedure for a number of conditions as well. There are 7 other conditions that it gives in these chapters in Leviticus that are like leprosy. Number 1 is bright spots on the skin. Verse 10, or in the second one in Leviticus, is a rising of the skin or rawness of the flesh, but it's not leprosy. Boils or spots, burning skin, yellow skin in an infected area, bright flecked spots, hair coming out. All those references, verse 1, 10, 18, 24, 30, 38, and 40 in Leviticus 13 and 14. Now these were all different diseases described here like leprosy, but not leprosy, which is why diagnosis was needed. The purpose of the whole procedure in God's law was diagnosis of true leprosy from those other diseases. You have to be able to tell the difference. Then, if the person is found not to have leprosy when they're properly diagnosed, they are counted as clean and free to go. But if it is leprosy that the person had in Bible times, then there's no treatment. But here is what what has to happen. What the Bible says in chapter 13, Leviticus, verse 45 and 46. The leper must rend their clothes, tear their clothes, like a mourner. They're to have a bare head. Their top lip must be covered after diagnosis. Top lip covered. When they walk around, they must shout, unclean, unclean, and they must live on their own. They must live outside the camp or the town. Now, leprosy was not always fatal in Bible times, but it was mostly fatal. And if a person somehow recovered, which some people did, Leviticus 13:49 to 14, verse 14, they were to go back to the priest, report to the priest again, be examined, shave all their skin, their hair and eyebrows and so on, make a sacrifice to God as thanks for healing, and then they were free to go back into society if it went away naturally. However, that was very rare, and generally speaking, the person died in a horrible way. Now, that's what God's law says about leprosy. And I'm saying this because this leper meets Jesus as he comes down from the mountain. But in New Testament times, the plight of a leper was made worse by other man-made rules in the Mishnah, made up by the rabbis, the Jewish religious leaders. I have a Mishnah at home, and that's how I read it. That's how I know this. God's law says, for the leper, he's to have rent clothes, his head's to be bare, he covers his top lip, he cries out unclean, and he lives alone outside the camp. But it's not surprising that strict religious people added a load more burdens and rules to lepers than what God's law does. Rabbis added these rules for lepers that made it even worse what Jesus was doing here in Matthew chapter 8. The rabbi adds in the Mishnah, one of them says, no one is to salute a leper. You're not even allowed to say hello to him. Where's that in God's law? It isn't. It's a religious tradition made up by fools under the name of religion. Another rabbi made up a law saying the leper's bed must be low to the ground. Where's that in God's law? It isn't. If he puts his head in a place, if he just sticks his head in and looks, the whole place is counted as unclean. He must be a minimum distance of 6 feet from other people. If he's lying down, but if he's standing up, the distance is 100 feet. Where's that in God's Bible? It isn't. Another rabbi called Meir said, you're not allowed to eat an egg if you bought it in a street where a leper was. Another rabbi says in the Mishnah that he often throws stones at lepers to keep them away. because the leper is not allowed to wash his own face. So that was the plight of lepers in the time that Jesus walked in Galilee. It was bad, but it was made worse by religious people and their wee man-made rules. Now, with that in mind now, let us look at the passage. We see four things in this passage. Number one, the active event. Number two, the leper's plea. Number three, Jesus Christ, his will and compassion. And number four, Jesus Christ's instruction. Number one, the active event. When he was come down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. And behold, there came a leper and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. The words tell us when and how this happened. When he was come down, when he was descending from the mountain, it's a participle. When he was descending, there's an ing on the end. As he was walking down, as he was coming down the mountain, great multitudes were coming with Jesus. Many, a great throng, the Greek word means, followed him. And behold, it says. And that word behold means pay attention. This is something really important. It's an imperative command in the Greek. Pay attention. Behold, there came, it's another participle, there was coming to Jesus a leper. A leper. Now, taken together, put all those words together, they describe this passage, they describe the incident. It's an active event, and it tells us exactly how it happened. It was not Jesus came down the mountain and he met a leper. No. But as Jesus was coming down the mountain, behold, a leper was coming to him. A leper was coming to him as he descended the mountain. Is that important? Yes, it is. Because it tells us exactly how it was able to happen. How did the leper get so close without people shouting and throwing stones at him? Well, if you've ever walked down on a mountain in the Mournes or anywhere else, you know why. Because when you're coming down a mountain, you're not looking around you. Because you do that, you'll fall. When you're coming down the mountain, you're looking where your feet are going. And people were all coming down the mountain, thousands of them, watching their step, so they didn't see the leper coming up. The event occurred on the way down the mountain. That's the first thing we see, the live event. Secondly, we see the leper's plea in verse 2. Marvelous, just the last little bit. There came a leper and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. Every word speaks volumes, full of meaning, isn't it? The leper came, no, what it says. As he was coming up, he came to Jesus and he worshipped him is the first thing it says. Now that word means kneeling down. He paid homage, he paid reverence, he worshipped Jesus. And as he was doing that, he was saying these words, Lord, if thou wilt, Lord, if you have a will to, if you want to, thou canst, you can, you could make me clean. And make me clean means purify or purge. When you put it together, it's great. The leper came and worshipped him because he knew that it was Christ's will alone if he was going to be well. If you will, you can make me clean. Is that not amazing faith? He knew Jesus far more than the crowd. He knew Jesus really. He knew Jesus was God because he worshipped him. You're not allowed as a Jew to worship anyone but God. But he also knew Jesus was sovereign. If you will, it's to do with your will, God. You just have to will it, and my leprosy, my incurable disease will be gone. Thou canst make me clean. He believed Jesus had the power to cure the incurable disease of leprosy. How did the leper know all this? I don't know, but he must have heard some sermons and heard what people were saying about Jesus. But he knew, and he worshipped Jesus as the all-powerful God who by a mere act of his will could cure an incurable disease. The leper, for all his destitution and isolation, knew that Jesus was the Son of God. Thirdly, we see Jesus Christ's compassion and his will in verse 3. And Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, saying, I will, be thou clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. We lose a little bit in translation from Greek to English, especially in this verse. Because here's what it says. Jesus put forth. See those words, put forth. Jesus, the word means Jesus stretched out or stretched over. And it's a participle, it's an ing. Jesus stretching out or stretching over the man who's on his knees worshipping. Jesus stretching over the man touched him. It says touched. Adhered to or clung to, the Greek word means. Jesus Christ put his arms around the leper. That's what it says. And said, I will, be thou clean. And immediately, the leprosy's gone. What a God. What a Savior. Jesus embraces lepers. No one's allowed to touch them. He puts his arms around them. He touches the untouchable. The one who cries unclean has to have his clothes torn, live outside the camp, not allowed to sit on the same bench as anybody else, who no one even says hello to in Israel. The avoided man, the unclean, everyone keeps him at least 6 feet away. He's used to being stoned by religious people. Jesus comes and helps the helpless. Jesus is the hope of the hopeless. Jesus doesn't avoid sinners, He doesn't avoid the unclean. He doesn't get infected with the sin of sinners or the leprosy of lepers. He comes and he touches them and he makes them clean. That's what happens when someone meets Jesus. Jesus has compassion on the leper in the same way he has compassion on sinners, because it's illustrative for us to see what Jesus is really like. That's why these stories are recorded. He takes hold of this man and he says, I will be you clean. And fourthly, we see Jesus' instructions. That's verse 4. And Jesus said unto him, See thou tell no man, but go thy way, show thyself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded in Leviticus for a testimony unto them. Go thy way, it's an imperative command. Jesus commands him to go and show evidence to the priest in the temple that you're clean now, and offer the sacrifice that Moses commanded in Leviticus, and it will all be a testimony to them that Jesus cleansed this man from his leprosy. Now, when you read the old commentators, that's exactly what they say. It's great. And you read some modern ones, they really get this verse the wrong way round. You know what some modern commentators say? Why did Jesus command him to go away? Was that not a bit harsh? Jesus wasn't going to allow him to follow him. That's a bit harsh. Some of the commentators actually say that. That's stupid. Anyone with understanding can see that. Jesus is not being hard on the leper by sending him away to the priest. He's not forbidding him from following Jesus. Jesus Christ wants the leper to obey God's law in Leviticus chapter 13 and 14 and go to the priest and be declared clean so he can go back into society. Because Jesus didn't come to destroy the law of God. He came to fulfill it. So the leper would go, be pronounced clean, offer the sacrifice of thanks to God, and legally obey God's law. That's why Jesus sends him away. I conclude and summarize. There's just 4 simple things in 4 verses. An active event. As Jesus was coming down the mountain, the leper came up and met him. We see the leper's plea was the second point. He believed Jesus was God. He believed in God's sovereign will. If it's God's will, he will be healed, and he believed Jesus had the power to do it. We see Jesus Christ's compassion on his will. I will be thou clean. And he touched him and made him whole. And we see the instructions Jesus gave him. Obey God's law. Now, don't break it. Go and obey God's law. Fulfill it. Now put yourself in the position of that man. I'm quite sure he never forgot that day for the rest of his life. Christ touched him and he was changed. He had no hope in this world, no hope at all, but Jesus Christ. And it's the same for all of us. We may not have a leprosy, but we have another incurable disease, as I was saying to the children, sin. And Jesus is the Savior, he's the rescuer. And for sin, there's no cure in the law of God. The law of God just condemns sinners. The law of God can diagnose us as sinners because we've all fallen short. We've all disobeyed it in thought, word, or deed, or all of them. And there's no cure in the law. There's no cure but in Jesus Christ through faith in him. What lessons is there for us from this passage? Number 1, Jesus is God to be worshipped. 2, his will is sovereign in salvation. He can cleanse whoever he will. And whoever comes to him, he will. He didn't turn anyone away. He has all power to forgive and heal. Jesus embraces sinners that no one else will touch. And he cleanses them, and their sin is gone. And he teaches them after they're cleansed. Now go and obey God's law. Do the right thing. We come to Christ, brothers and sisters. All of us did who are saved. We come to Christ like lepers in our sin. Some of us were unliked by religious people. maybe even avoided by the world. Some sinners that come to Christ were absolutely untouchable. But no one is untouchable to Jesus Christ. John Bunyan was a tinker. He was always getting drunk and brawling and fighting. And Jesus saved him through hearing 3 women talking in the marketplace. Ian Booth was another sinful man. God saved him and he started the Salvation Army. Jesus Christ, perfect, pure, sinless, spotless. He encounters sinners and he cleanses them from their sin. He embraces them. And his righteousness, his perfect righteousness covers our unrighteousness. And his blood covers our sin. And his purity covers our defilement. To all that put their faith, their trust in him. Are you trusting in him? Not did you trust. Present active participle. Are you trusting in him? That's what faith is. Every day I am trusting in him. There's no sin that Jesus cannot cleanse. Believers are not better than anyone else. Sure, we're not. If anyone's here this morning and you're not saved, you may think, oh, Christians, you think you're better. No, we do not think we're better. We are Christians because we know we're not. Because to be a Christian, one has to first say, I am the sinner. I need forgiven. I'm not better than anybody else. We are Christians because we admit we're not better. And Jesus forgives us from our sin when we put our trust in him. And if you were to come this morning to Jesus as the leper did physically, if you were to come to Jesus where you sit in your heart and in your mind and just say to him silently in your heart, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. You know what he would say? I will be thou clean. Because everyone that says that, he cleanses. And you would be a Christian. And that's all it is. And then we keep on believing, we trust him, we trust him. How are we going to heaven? Because I'm trusting Jesus. That's it. Always the same answer. And Jesus will be with you when you trust him for the rest of your life, and even he will be with you when you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, cleansed by Christ. I pray if there's anyone here not trusting the Lord, put your faith in him today. And thank you for your attention. May the Lord bless you.